Sit down. I'll sit down. Sit down there.
Oireachtas tíarna tanála for the Corfún, an sin distúrin ar gníomhara, agus náirta grástud runnarin an ídahúr concríca. An scrúta tas nó for arnid of ríhir, agus arnid a gníomh fasta, as heard three the creek no for eat, three creestar tíarna amen. Directly beseech thee, O Lord, our actions by the holy inspirations, and carry them on by thy gracious assistance, that every word and work of ours may always begin from thee, and by thee be happily ended through Christ our Lord. Amen.
I call the leader. Thank you, Cahill. The order of business is item 2810 on the order paper. Item 2810, motion regarding the Democratic Republic of the Congo, to be taken on the conclusion of the order of business without debate. Just for the advice of the House as well, the hearings of the Shannon Public Consultation Committee will take place today from midday on the subject of change makers in Ireland, and representatives from Social Entrepreneurs Ireland, Ashoka and the One Foundation will be here, and I'd encourage as many senators as possible to attend. I think it will be a very good presentation from all involved. Thank you.
Senator Mooney. I'm always reluctant to comment on the excellent work that the Leader of the House does in relation to ordering the business of the House, but I have to express to him concerns on this side of the House at what seems in recent weeks, particularly since the resumption after Christmas, of a singular lack of legislation in the programme that is put before the House. And also, I'm sure that the Leader will agree that it's not in the best interest of the House or its future that we should, for example, on a Wednesday, have very long adjournments where there was no business to be conducted before the House. Now, I understand perfectly that the Leader is relying on ministers to bring legislation before the House, but I would just put down a marker that perhaps that he might increase his pressure on his ministerial colleagues to try and bring more legislation before the House, because I believe that the House deserves it, and as ministers who come before this House testify, they always ensure that this House acts in the most professional way possible and a sufficient manner in which it deals with legislation and enhances legislation, and I think ultimately it enhances the House. I also want to raise the first report of the Advisory Group on Tax and Social Welfare, which was published yesterday. Now, I understand that overnight that the Minister has kicked this into an Oireachtas committee, and the newspapers this morning are reporting that it could be 18 months, or that it could be before, or it could be after the next general election before there's any attempt made to address this issue. However, I do believe that the Minister should come before the House and give an outline of what her own views are. After all, she has had this report for over a year, and last evening anybody who was watching, a member of the committee who drew up the report on television, even she admitted that there was no guarantee that the savings that were going to accrue as a result of the implementation of these recommendations would be used to improve or reduce child poverty. So ultimately, the impression being created by this report and the recommendations on it and the immediate aftermath of the publication of it was that the government, if implemented, would save 200 million. But there was no talk whatsoever about how we would address the wider issue of providing support services. This country does not have a great record in terms of support services for children, and it's obvious from reading the report that if any aspect of the two preferred options were to be implemented, that it would not only have a severe impact on the squeezed middle, but it actually would affect those at the lower end of the income scale, because the recommendation in relation to the top-up payments suggests that there should be an abolition of the family income supplement, so that ultimately that people who would be targeted as a result of the recommendations would probably be the people that would lose out. So in that context, I think it's important that the Minister should come before the House and perhaps outline what her views are, not just about the whole issue of child benefit, but how, if these recommendations were to be implemented, how the money would be distributed in such a way as to address the support services, for example, the high cost of childcare. Minister Fitzgerald some months ago, Minister Fitzgerald some months ago went public in saying that she believed that there should be a change in the child benefit money and that it should be targeted more on childcare places. I think that there is a need for a debate here as to how the money relating to child benefit is distributed before you take on any of these recommendations, which ultimately is going to affect those who are at the bottom end of the scale.
Senator Bacic.
Thank you, Caoirleach. And I think, first of all, just to say that Minister Burton will be in with us in this House next Tuesday to debate the issues arising from the Mangan report. And again, just to say that she has put on record several times her concern and anxiety to ensure reform of payments generally, of social protection payments generally, but in particular payments directed at relieving and alleviating child poverty on the basis and in the context where we've seen rates rise but outcomes not improve. And again, just to say what I said yesterday, that it's really worrying to see how the outcomes in terms of child poverty do not appear to have improved despite the money that has been spent. And therefore we need to look at how best to spend the money we have and how to ensure that outcomes can be improved. For example, as Senator Mooney said, through putting money directly into the provision of services. And we will also have Minister Fitzgerald into this House, I think, in 2 weeks' time. I know she was scheduled to be with us some weeks ago, and we had to postpone that because of the funeral of Garda Adrian Donoghue. But I know she is due to be in this House, I think, in 2 weeks' time to debate issues around children's rights and around childcare. And I think we could have the debate on both days. But I also, Caoirleach, just welcome the fact that today we'll be having another session with the Shannon Public Consultations Committee from midday in this House on the subject of making change through social entrepreneurship. And just to stress, as the Leader has said, that all senators are welcome and indeed encouraged to attend the hearings in this chamber where we have public consultation going on. Anyone who attended the last consultation on lifestyle changes and prevention of cancer, or the previous one on the rights of older people, would have found it, I think, a very valuable experience. And so we have some really impressive speakers coming in today, as we had previously. So I really would urge colleagues to come and sit in for at least some of the hearings today. And we'll have, in particular, Deirdre Mortell of the One Foundation, Paul O'Hara of Ashoka Ireland, Caroline Casey of Canchi, James Whelton of Coder Dojo, Sean Coughlin of Social Entrepreneurs Ireland, and Niamh Gallagher of Women for Elections. We have a really good range of speakers today. Could I also, Caoirleach, just say that I very much welcome the launch of the St. Patrick's Day Parade. On a pleasant note, it's good to see that we're going to have some new innovations in the parade this year and in the festival to be held between 14th and 18th of March. And I know it's being launched in the context of the gathering, and there's a real hope that we'll see thousands of visitors coming to Ireland to experience the celebrations. We're going to have a People's Parade, a new part of the Dublin Festival. And for those of us who are privileged to be in Dublin and to live near the parade, certainly we'll be encouraging friends and relatives to come and join us to visit the parade and to celebrate that day. And just very finally to say, I know we'll be debating the Magdalen report next week, but I know that there's some reports today about possible preclusions or possible restrictions on applications for survivors who had gone through the redress board. And I think we do need to make sure that I have every confidence Judge Quirk will ensure fairness in terms of the application of the redress scheme, because it would be most unfair if people were in some way precluded because they'd also spent time in an industrial school. Clearly these two things are considered separately. If they were subjected to forced labour in a Magdalen institution, then they should be able to receive compensation for that, whether or not they'd received redress under the previous scheme in respect of the industrial schools. And just to finally say that there's been a good deal of publicity about the inclusion of the Bethany home, and I do think there's a very strong case for inclusion. I know Senator Norris in particular has really very strongly spoken out on this for some years now, but it is important that we see survivors of these institutions addressed in an inclusive way. And I know again that Judge Quirk and that the government have indicated they will be inclusive in the application of the scheme. Thank you.
Senator Barrett.
And I thank the Leader and Deputy Leader for alerting us to the social entrepreneurs who will be speaking later. I think that's a commendable exercise. Yesterday, the House was alerted to the imminent dangers of the practice of medicine by doctors without insurance. I think all sides of the House agreed on the urgency of the matter of Senator Burke's bill, except, of course, the Department of Health. Now, it's scheduled for Tuesday. I think it should go ahead on Tuesday. We cannot be alerted by Senator Burke to a major problem and to allow uninsured doctors to practice for a minute longer than necessary. I think we don't want this bill to go the same way as when Senator Crown, beside me, alerted the Department of Health to the dangers of smoking in cars where children were present. That disappeared into the Department of Health nearly a year ago. So we have to require the Department of Health and indeed other branches of the permanent government to take notice of what happens here in Parliament. And we cannot condone, now that we've been alerted to it by Senator Burke, the uninsured practice of medicine for a minute longer than is necessary. We've had manifestations, Cathaoirleach, of the same kind of problem with other ministers. The refusal of Minister Sherlock to allow any role in the Science Foundation Ireland for the Royal Irish Academy, the Royal Dublin Society. I'm sorry, civil servants do not have a monopoly of wisdom in this country. A completely inadequate regulatory impact assessment was circulated about 6 weeks late for the taxi regulation bill, and that's not good enough either. So I think that the two reforms we need, that we are alerted now that the practice of medicine by people without insurance is urgent, and I would urge the leader to ensure that the bill can proceed. The department can put in amendments the same as the rest of us do when Ms McKell will send us the deadline for amendments. We think it's urgent and it should proceed. And I'm delighted that Senator Burke is not deterred. He sent out another bill today, and I commend him for his energy and commitment. This one is on civil law, missing persons, and I think he performs a notable role in the Senate. And the second reform, I think, Leader, is we want regulatory impact assessments it's not a discretionary part of governance in this House, and they must be circulated with the bill and comprehensively cover the contents of bills. We're prepared to play our role, and I think we're very well led from the Cathaoirleach and the leader, but we've been shoddily treated in those three incidents: medical insurance, Science Foundation Ireland, and the taxi regulation bill, and we want an improvement, and I'm sure the leader will ensure that.
Senator Noon.
I'd like to join with Senator Barrett in his comments on Senator Burke's excellent bill, which had unanimous support in the House yesterday. And while it does cater for a situation that isn't extremely frequent, it is nevertheless closing a loophole that we must encourage. And I would agree with all his comments with regard to who is actually in charge around here, and the civil service. I mean, we don't know exactly what happened, but I would definitely encourage the minister to allow the bill to be seen in the way that it had been intended. I think up until an hour before the bill was in the House yesterday, it was considered to be perfectly fine and acceptable. So I think it's something that is usefully highlighted. In Ireland, we have a dangerous gap in the level of detail in our statistics for children and their level of obesity. And in a week where we see that 1 in 4 children in Ireland is obese, I think it's something that we really need to give urgent attention to. In the NHS, there's a calculator, or on the NHS website, they have a calculator, an obesity calculator, or at least a body mass calculator, where parents can, put in the basic information about their children and assess where they're at. And when a child is born, they're actually weighed regularly to see that they're gaining weight in the appropriate way. But I think that equally there should be a system whereby, the progress of a child's health with all the various components, including weight, be assessed, not on a on a seriously regular basis, but certainly frequently enough, and that once they present to GPs showing signs of obesity, that serious measures would be taken in hand to deal with it. There has been a public consultation on the area of lifestyle, and the report on lifestyle and how you can reduce cancer and increase life expectancy, is a very good report. And I think it is time really for us to debate this with the Minister so that he can realise the conclusions of that report, and also take on board lots of the concerns that are being raised by members on a regular basis, particularly in relation to the increasing obesity problem that we have in this country. Thank you.
Senator Lane.
Very good. Cardiff, I'd like to call on the Minister for Justice and the Commissioner to enter into meaningful discussions with the GRA and the AGSI in relation to the present dispute and concerns and worries of the membership of the Garda Síochána in relation to proposed cutbacks in their pay. They've suffered major cutbacks, as we already know. Senator Maurice Cummins and Senator Ned O'Sullivan and I are representatives were nominated by the GRA and the AGSI. And in the last administration, we knew the difficulties that we had at the particular time. Gardaí had entered into commitments regarding, like many more, in relation to housing on the basis of certainty. Now, there's no certainty anymore. And the situation is that of all the different professions, the Gardaí can never and should never be compromised financially. So it's a very serious situation. And I would call on the Minister of Justice and Defence, and it's a very unwise combination, in fact, to have one minister in charge of both those organisations. And there seems to be some sort of personal antagonism between the Minister and the Garda Síochána. And I'd just like to highlight how serious the situation is. Last Monday evening at 7:30 p.m. on the 18th of February, Mulligan's supermarket in Courtubber, Carrigan-Shannon, was robbed of 10,000 cigarettes worth 2,000 cash by Romanian/Roma gypsies. 9 of them arrived.
Senator, we can't be discussing this.
Well, I got permission from the owner of this premise to highlight this issue, because when you lose...
It doesn't matter whether you have...
If you lost...
There's no convictions or anything.
You lost 10,000 cigarettes...
Senator, there's no convictions or anything in relation to this. We're not discussing this here. Any question for the Leader?
9 guards... Well, I want a debate on this particular issue. Nine people arrived in a people carrier. They're already sussed out the premises.
Senator, have you a question for the Leader?
The question is, I want the Minister for Justice to come into this House and explain the situation that's developing at the moment, where law and order is breaking down. We will have a situation where the Gardaí will not answer their own private phones and will not use their own private cars as of from today or tomorrow. That is a serious situation, and the point I'm making, Cairlick, is this. I'm highlighting how people are very vulnerable at the moment. When a shop came in, literally robbed at 7:30 in the evening of that type of equipment, and the guards were called 10 minutes later, and they appeared immediately, I must be honest. But the point is, the place, Ireland, rural Ireland, is under assault at the moment from criminals, and now we're in dispute with the Garda Síochána. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Keelik. I'm afraid that the Taoiseach's heartfelt apology in the Dáil the other day is in serious danger of being undermined. And this is relating to what Senator Bartik said as well. There's apparently officials at the Department of Justice have cast doubt on whether or not the Magdalene survivors would be included in this scheme because they'd already been part of some of them had already been part of the redress board. Well, they were given an assurance that time that this was a standalone inquiry. They are not avaricious people. They have indicated that they were not primarily looking for money, and it's humiliating of them to suggest in any way that they were. Can I just say this? The logic of it is odd. If you were injured in 2 successive car crashes separated by several years, you would expect rightly to be compensated for both. I would also like to address the business of the Bethany House. As Senator Batchel so generously indicated, I've raised this over many years. I've raised in particular, in general as well, I should say, the question of the way in which there seems to be an exclusion for Protestants from any kind of ill-doing in this area, whether it's bullying in schools or this kind of institutional abuse. But I'm very concerned about an article that appeared in the Irish Examiner, which is usually a very reasonable and balanced newspaper, on the 3rd of January. And this seems to me to be a sensationalized, ill-informed and opportunistic piece. And the language doesn't do anything to justify or assist in this cause. The person says there was slaughter from 1935 to 1944. They died because it suited. That's an accusation of mass murder. And I don't think it's appropriate. I don't think it's balanced. The person indicates that the church did not run the homes. There was an involvement by an evangelical wing. Now, as somebody who's raised this, I'm not in any way attempting to excuse the people or the institutions that were involved. And then most worrying and most inaccurately, it says, I have heard of this self-awareness clearly in some voices and actions in the Catholic Church, but none in the Church of Ireland. Where was this person where on radio and in this House I repeated the demands by the previous Archbishop of Dublin, the Reverend Dr. John Neal, that the Bethany home be included in the redress scheme? Where was she? Why wasn't she listening? And I'll conclude with this. Did she listen over the last couple of months where Archbishop Michael Jackson asked for there to be an inquiry? And I think this article should be withdrawn and apologised for.
Senator Hayden.
Thank you very much, Gairloch. This morning, Minister Janice Sullivan launched the homelessness policy statement on foot of a commitment in the programme for government that this government would adopt a housing-led approach, a housing-first approach to homelessness. The elements of this policy will focus on very much a change of direction and will focus on the prevention of homelessness and the provision of good quality accommodation in the first instance, and for those already in homelessness, prioritising moving on. This is on foot of a report prepared by Professor Ernest Sullivan in Trinity College Dublin, where he found that there was, he criticised the value for money obtained from the current strategy, which prioritises emergency provision. I must say that I very much welcome, as somebody who's worked in this area for many, many years, I very much welcome this new direction. I myself am very well aware of the value of prevention. And I know from experience that once somebody becomes homeless, it is much more difficult to bring them back into a home. And also, I have personally met residents of emergency accommodation who have been in emergency accommodation for up to 20 years. I think it's high time that we take this approach of prioritising the provision of a home and not the provision, or rather the funding of bodies in beds. And I would ask the Leader of the House to invite Minister John O'Sullivan in at the earliest possible opportunity to discuss this new homeless policy statement, which I think is of critical importance in achieving the government's commitment of ending long-term homelessness by 2016. Thank you.
Senator Doherty.
I'd just like to add a note of caution to one of the statements made by Senator Layden around the use of terminology around ethnic minorities. I think it's something that's becoming more prevalent in the public sphere recently, particularly around travellers, the Roma community, etc., that the judicial process hasn't been gone through, and that really a statement like that shouldn't be made until it's actually found to be true. And I would ask him maybe to retract that at some stage.
That matter when
But I think it's an issue, maybe it's something we should have a debate around, the whole area of racism and racist language that is used in the public sphere. But I'm here this morning to raise the issue around a report on the rural transport programme. We've seen a decline in the number of rural Garda stations, and courthouses are to be rationalised, cutbacks in health services, etc. in rural areas. The latest episode we hear about is restructuring proposals around the rural transport programme, which have been leaked to the media, which apparently have been endorsed and recommended by Minister Kelly. So I'm not sure whether this report is true or not, but I'm certain the question I would have for the Leader of the House is, could we ask Minister Kelly to come in and tell us what his plans for the restructuring of rural transport are? If the report is to be believed, it would see a realignment of the programmes with losses of jobs, cutbacks in the number of services, and realign them under regional authorities. And it also purports then that would be lead to better subsidiarity. I would find that difficult to understand how that would work, and I'd love to hear from Minister Kelly what he is proposing exactly, how he's going to ensure that rural transport can be continued and expanded, because it's particularly needed now at the moment because of the fact that it's much more expensive for people to travel in rural areas, and people are feeling more isolated at the moment. So I think a fulsome debate around the whole area of rural transport would be very welcome. Good morning.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Brennan.
Could I say that this month last year, February last year, it was proposed by the Minister for Transport, Tourism and Sport that we would complete an audit, a nationwide audit of speed limits on our national and county roads, I think it's a very important issue. Many of our speed limits, particularly on our country roads, are totally inappropriate. Many accidents are taking place on our country roads, on roads indeed that there's only room for one vehicle to travel and no room to pass on, an 80-kilometre speed limit on them. Totally inappropriate. It's 12 months ago since the National Roads Authority and all our local authorities were asked to participate in this audit, and indeed there was an emphasis on the part that local people who are more than familiar with the road speed limits in their respective areas would participate. There was an emphasis on local people. And if I could ask Cathaoirleach, on a progress report, how it has come on, how our local authorities have responded to this request, and perhaps maybe the Minister for Transport and Tourism would come into this House and tell us all what the changes proposed are, and when the speed limits on many of our roads, which are, as I have already said, totally inappropriate, are likely to be changed and brought to more realistic speed limits on our country roads.
Senator O'Sullivan.
I'd be thankful if the leader could raise a matter with the Minister for Transport relating to the absence of lifts in many of our rural railway stations. I'm talking about the manner in which passengers cross from one platform to the other. And I'll just give an example of the railway station which I'm most familiar, which is Charleville. Passengers will say, getting off the Dublin-Cork train, in order to leave the railway station, they have to cross the railway tracks, and the only method is the old true and tried metal bridge. And this is very inconvenient, especially for elderly people carrying suitcases and so on. There is a provision for invalided persons that when the train departs, some form of platform is put across the tracks, and people are able to cross that way. But I think in this day and age, it really is. It's not. It's very unreasonable that ordinary passengers, even of a certain age, will have to cross up these steep metal bridges in order to exit a railway station. And I'd ask that the leader would bring this to the attention of the Minister. Margaret.
Senator Keane.
Much, and I again want to support what was said about Senator Colin Burke's bill, and just to note it, I think that 30% of all the bills that were initiated in the last 10 years initiated in the Seanad, and so I maybe have the figure quite wrong, but I think it is a bad day for the Seanad if it is a thing that we can't proceed with bills that are, you know, we can accept amendments, we can, they're not obviously going to be right the first go, but I think definitely that we should, as a Senate, look into see exactly was it crossed wires or something happened or whatever, and it would be acceptable if there was a misunderstanding, but we need to get to the bottom of it really. I just want to support Senator Catherine Noone there when she calls on obesity for children, and to say that there is a Growing Up in Ireland survey that is, and I think we should give the government credit for surveys that have been undertaken, and indeed in 2008 the Growing Up in Ireland survey started. The first tranche is over. The second, Minister Fitzgerald launched, and it did in December 2012, and it showed that 1 in 4 children are obese, a quarter of the children in Ireland. Now, I think the government is going about it the right way and is saying, surveying, see what happens. And it is related, because it did show, that survey did show, that social circumstances, there were a higher percentage of the people who are in poor circumstances, obese, than were not. So therefore, it is related to what Minister John Burton is doing now, that the whole childcare, child facility benefits should be included. And I want to support the leader, Senator Ivana Bacik, in ensuring that we have an early debate on this. And my final and my question to the leader is, for the Bethany survivors, could we get a statement on that? Because I understand that there are only about 20 survivors from the Bethany homes, and it's not a huge number. And if we could have the redress scheme look at that, and as well, we had heard Dr. Jackson on the radio. I actually, you know, and very slow to say the church should be included. So I want to say that all of the churches and convents, the whole lot, a debate on that as well. Thank you.
St. Patrick's Day at Cathaoirleach is fast approaching, and we will have government ministers and other representatives travelling to many parts of the world. And it's a reminder, I suppose, in a way, how the Irish have travelled worldwide, and also the contribution which they have made to the countries of their adoption. And St. Patrick's Day as well is a time for celebration, and this year, because of the gathering will be central, I believe, to the St. Patrick's Day celebrations. But there's one group who will not be able to come back to Ireland, and who will dearly wish to come back to Ireland, and that's the undocumented Irish in America, because if they come back, they're in grave danger of not being able to go back to America again. They're virtually living in a no-man's land. And as an Irish nation, they're part of our nation as well. And they must be suffering, and suffering very much. And I had one particular case of a person from Tipperary who married an American girl. They came back on a holiday. And unfortunately, he was not allowed back to America. She had to return on her own. And that's only one of many, many cases. Now, I know An Taoiseach will be raising this question, as he has indicated, at the highest level. And it's evident as well that President Obama has now gone on record that he favours legislation to correct this. But I do think that if we don't succeed on this occasion, efforts have been made in the past, we may fail. And there are hundreds of thousands of undocumented Irish, and that's being increased by something like 200 to 300 or 400, maybe more a day from Ireland, of people who are emigrating. So there's a major part of the Irish nation there at the moment, but not recognised. I would only hope that anybody who has any influence, not just in political circles, but we can raise it in business circles, organisation circles, we should treat this as a matter of urgency. But I do know, as we walk down, or whoever will be walking down Fifth Avenue on St. Patrick's Day, there will be people there watching, hiding their identities, hiding their faces, who want to be Irish once again, but they also want to be good to the country of their adoption. I hope it doesn't go beyond another year at Cathaoirleach. It really and truly is a very worrying situation.
Senator O'Keefe.
Thank you, Cathaoirleach. I just want to support my colleagues who've raised the issue again, as we have before in this House, of obesity among children. I, in 1995, made a documentary about obesity in children in the UK. And at that point, consultants in the UK were saying this is an epidemic. And it surely is more than an epidemic now, when 1 in 4 of our children are struggling with weight, and where there is still little intervention at that level. Now, I know, Leader, that there is a working group on obesity, and we communicated with them in relation to the Public Consultation Committee about common cancers and the way that we can prevent them through changes in lifestyle. And I wonder, while we're waiting also for a minister to come in and have a discussion about the Public Consultation Committee's findings, it would also be useful to ask if we might have an update from the working group on obesity, because they are working away behind the scenes between the Department of Children, the Department of Health, the Department of Education. And I feel that perhaps they could do with some support, they could do with some encouragement as they do that work, because there are many twists and turns in relation to where they ought to go and what they need to be doing. So perhaps, Leader, we could invite someone to give us an update in relation to that work, and it would then inform our thinking and our understanding of what's happening in relation to what the government is trying to do for those children. Many thanks.
Senator Mullen.
Cahill, I understand that it's the leader's intention to invite the Minister for Communications, Energy and National Resources to address the House in the near future. And perhaps that could be the occasion, and I would ask that we would get an opportunity to renew our discussion on the funding of public service broadcasting in this country. The programme for government made a commitment, as the House knows, to review the funding of public and independent broadcasting. And I think it's very, very important that we would see change in this area. The Independent Broadcasters of Ireland have spoken very clearly, and I think have voiced a very legitimate concern about the fact that RTE has an unfettered commercial mandate, and it enjoys, as we all know, the lion's share of public money for broadcasting. I think about 80% of the Sound and Vision Fund, which was set up to assist independent broadcasting companies, ends up going back to RTE anyway. So RTE enjoys a complete monopoly of the budget, and yet there's hardly a politician in this House who doesn't tune in regularly to the death notices on local radio, for example, to give a very good example of public service broadcasting, or indeed coverage of local sporting and cultural events, or indeed catering for local cultural tastes. I think if there's one thing we can all be sure of, that is that over the last 20 years or so, local radio in particular has contributed hugely to quality of life in this country, and local radio stations claim the loyalty, indeed, and to the quality of death, as Senator Norris rightly and wittily points out. And it is certainly the case that they claim, for example, up to 2/3 of the public are tuning in. So I would like to see early movement on this. I know there's going to be a report from the Broadcasting Authority in April, after which it's proposed to replace the licence with this household broadcasting charge. But I think it's right that we should be looking at it in terms of it being a public broadcasting charge, and that there should be a much fairer divvying out of resources to reflect the diversity that is in this country, and to reflect the very particular and special contribution that local media are paying.
Senator Mullins.
Asking for your indulgence this morning with an issue that I wish to raise, and I know you're very much a sports-loving person yourself. On Sunday next, my home town of Ballinasloe play in an All-Ireland club final in Croke Park against the Kerry champions Kilmare.
That's on local radio.
We're in danger of being seriously under strength, because one of our star players is serving with the Irish peacekeeping mission in Lebanon. And unfortunately, he's unable to secure some unpaid leave to enable him to play there.
It's not available for the game.
The Army authorities have been very accommodating up to now, and the difficulty arose because the semi-final had to be replayed on 2 occasions, and he used his leave up for took it at the time that the original final was fixed for. So I'm asking the leader if he would possibly intervene with the Minister for Justice and the Army authorities to secure 3 days.
So that you could ask the leader outside of the
3 days,
chamber here.
3 days unpaid leave, because this young fella, he's a role model for young people.
For the Senator, for the adjournment.
Sport is very.
Senator, you'll have to take this matter up with the leader.
There's huge hype in the town of Ballinasloe this weekend, and it would be a shame that a young fella couldn't realise his ambition to play in Croke Park on the biggest occasion in his sporting career to date. Thank you.
Senator Byrne.
I'm calling for a debate, Cathaoirleach, in the Shannon on the role of grandparents in our society. I know there's a bill in the Dáil, and it's welcome, about the access rights of grandparents, and that's very necessary. But it seems to me that grandparents at the moment are playing a huge role in the rearing of children and in minding children, and in some cases are often travelling great distances to be available to their families. I see many people in Meath whose parents come in from Dublin in particular, and from further afield, Kildare and Westmeath, to mind children. The issue is particularly acute for frontline public sector workers who work night shift or who work weekends, and for whom creche facilities aren't readily available or would be too costly to provide the type of care that's required. And I think there's a great economic benefit being given to the state by the grandparents providing this work, to allow, as I say, a lot of frontline public sector workers, but also many other workers go to work, workers in factories who do night shift, for example, and just general workers who work 9 to 5 as well. There's a huge economic benefit given. There's little recognition of the role of grandparents, except appreciation and thanks to their families. And I think we could do more in society to recognise this work that's going on. It's massive. It's a response to rising childcare costs, and I'm very grateful to my mother, who helps out in our house. But it seems to be a huge undertaking at the moment among the grandparents of Ireland, and it should be welcomed and thanked, but I think recognised by the state as well.
Senator Paul Coughlin.
I'm concerned about the threat to our national tourism golf product and from AIB Merchant Services, and because of their new merchant terminal policy, or attempted new merchant terminal policy to these people. I understand, or I'm given to understand, that they want to now charge anything between 20,000 to 75,000 to these people who've been in business for years, many of them, to retain their merchant terminal machines. And already, as we know, there's a 2% charge on each, or up to 2%, on each transaction processed. Now, this is being claimed, apparently, to cover potential contingent liability. But presumably the charge that's there on each transaction, which has been covering it presumably all along, has been there to do that. Now, this is a change in the ground rules, and it's been done unilaterally, which is rather very unfair. These are
operated in the UK.
Yes. Oh, sorry. Well, I didn't know that detail. But these people are responsible for about 80,000 visitors to our shores annually, responsible for an estimated consumer spend of 110 million. Now, I would ask, Leader, that there be withdrawal of this request immediately, and there'd be immediate consultation. And, you know, we need to nurture tourism. And Senator Ross was talking a minute ago about the gathering, which is so important to us this year, and the events that are going to surround St. Patrick's Day. And I am sure, in connection with the gathering, that, Leader, you will be having in here shortly, hopefully, Minister Varadkar for Transport and Tourism. And, you know, every aspect of this is so important. We're trying to nurture this at this difficult time when, you know, we're in recessionary times, we accept that. You know, everything is important. Every visitor, every organisation, and there's lots of organisations involved with these people, the IG2A. So I think, Leader, that's a serious request, and I would encourage you that you'd arrange a debate in an early course involving Minister Varadkar, but I'm writing to him myself today on that matter.
Senator Bradford.
I support the comments of our colleague Senator Ross in relation to the undocumented Irish in the United States. And that appears to be the term we use in relation to those people. I did hear the Taoiseach yesterday indicate that during the course of his forthcoming visit to the United States, it would be very much at the top of his agenda, and he will be working with the US authorities and government to try to make progress on the matter. And there does appear to be a window of opportunity in relation to the recent comments of President Obama, but of course it will require cross-party support in the US political system. It was a number of years ago that the late Ted Kennedy, in conjunction with Senator John McCain, produced a very effective piece of legislation which certainly would have transformed the lives of tens of thousands of Irish persons in the US. Sadly, the legislation did not pass, but I think there may be the momentum now, and the Irish government, I'm sure, will be very helpful in relation to this particular issue. The lobby groups in the United States are very, very strong. They are doing tremendous work. In fact, my first visit to the United States as a politician was back in 1989, when the problem was very profound. It appears to be as profound again, and at that stage the Irish immigration reform movement, I think, was the main organising body. And in fact there was a young gentleman from Dublin called Daniel O'Leary, whose uncle was the captain of the guard here in Leinster House, and he was one of the leaders of that organisation. In the 1990s and maybe the first decade of the new millennium, the problem went under radar, but again now, because of the economic state of the country and of Europe, and I suppose of the world, it's, I think, a serious priority, not just I think in the United States, but next week I think the focus must be on the United States. But I know the Taoiseach is committed to this issue, and it will require an all-party effort. There have been a few occasions where the House here and the other House has passed various motions of support for these people, and maybe it's something we could consider, particularly in advance of St. Patrick's Day, but I support Senator O'Murrow. I think everybody does, and I think it must be and indeed it is a political priority of the government and of particularly the Taoiseach over the next number of weeks.
Senator Raymond Coughlin.
I was just listening to some of my colleagues here talking about the obesity issue in Ireland, where 1 in 4 children are regarded as being obese, and it would be remiss of me not to comment on it today. Obesity, it's a very complex area from 2 perspectives. One, to do with genetics, and I know there's a lot of research going on in the Children's Research Centre on this particular area, and children dealing with it from a genetic perspective, no matter what amount of fitness regime they get into or diet, it's always going to be an issue with them going forward. On the other side of the coin, the obesity factor has an awful lot to do with education. A lack of education with regards to fitness and a lack of education with regards to diet. But more importantly, I think it's a lack of understanding of what motivation is all about and the lazy society basically that we're dealing with from parents down. Now, there are numerous initiatives. The Growing Up in Ireland has been referred to. The Minister for Health is launching another initiative in the Mansion House coming up next week. We have the Irish Sports Council, the national governing body, and a group of individuals around the country doing wonderful things in Ireland to educate the children who participate in physical activity. But it's those who are lost to physical activity that are the ones that we have to challenge. We've noticed Operation Transformation over the past 6 weeks, which to me is a 6-week wonder, and it's really only more of a reality television show. I asked the question at the Health Committee meeting last week. Operation Transformation has been in existence for something like 6 years. Has the fitness level and the awareness level of people in Ireland improved or disimproved over those past 6 years? Well, believe me, it has disimproved, despite the fact that Operation Transformation is bringing awareness to the campaign. But they came up with a 7-point plan, and I pointed out in my remarks to them, the 7-point plan is actually a no-brainer. It's something that we grew up with in sports all our lives. The big important issue here is implementation of the plan. Now, we have the Department of Education, Department of Health, Department of Youth and Children and Youth Affairs, Department of Agriculture and Foods, the Department of Sports, all doing wonderful things in different directions, but we need a little bit of cohesion here. However, I'm pleased today to be able to say to you, since I brought my initiative Points for Life to the Shannon here last November, 12 months ago, I've been working very closely with the Department of Education, and my initiative is now a priority on their schedule, and I would hope within the next couple of months to formally launch physical exercise where they will at least learn the fundamental basic skills in what it's all about. Now, if I may just finish on another note, St. Patrick's Festival has been mentioned, and I would like to invite all my colleagues and anybody listening to the St. Patrick's Festival 5K, which will be starting and finishing outside the Mansion House in Dublin on the 16th of March, and we will have many people from overseas participating in this as part of the gathering. Good morning.
Senator Conway.
And it's a very interesting invitation from Senator Coughlin. Perhaps we all should reflect on it on the 16th of March.
You'll be there, Senator.
Indeed, we'll have to make a special effort on this occasion, given the fact that our colleague is organising it. So I'd encourage you, Cathaoirleach, to lead the way on the 16th of March. Indeed, on another very important issue, and I'd like to commend Senator Murphy and indeed Senator Bradford for raising this, because it was my intention to raise it today, and I intend to do it now. I was delighted with the Taoiseach's announcement yesterday that he is making an issue of the upcoming legislation for the undocumented Irish in the United States. I spoke to a family over Christmas, to a lady whose husband died, and her 2 sons in America were not in a position to come home for the funeral because they were both illegal, and they were afraid that if they came home that they wouldn't be able to get back out. That's the human suffering that citizens of this country who are in America undocumented are suffering. And we as a government and as an Oireachtas have a responsibility to do everything we can to assist our friends in Congress, our bipartisan friends who are putting through legislation to ensure that it actually gets over the line. There has been a number of possible dawns in this area, and indeed, as mentioned, the Kennedy-McCain bill back in 2007, which faltered. I was at a rally in Washington in 2007 where there was 3,500 undocumented Irish who braved the snow in order to attend that rally, because all they want is to be able to pay their taxes. They want a pathway to legalisation. They want to be able to come home for family events. They want to be legal. They don't want to be illegal. They want to play a part in what they now consider their new home. And we often talk here about people abroad having votes and so on. Let's get the fundamentals right first. Let's get their quality of life and their legality sorted out. And let's help and support the congressmen and senators in the United States who are our friends and who are doing their best to get this over the line.
The Leader.
Thank you, Cathaoirleach. Senator Mooney raised the question of the lack of legislation since January. This is the 5th sitting week since we resumed in January, and every one of those weeks I think we've dealt with at least 2 or 3 pieces of legislation, and last week we dealt with 4 pieces of legislation. And I think the reason why there's this week why there's so little legislation is due to the altered Dáil schedules to deal with the promissory notes and the Magdalene Laundry report, which deferred the passage of legislation that was due to come to this House. So I can assure the Senator that we will have, if not next week, the previous week, I know we have quite a number of pieces of legislation due to come to the House. Senator Mooney also mentioned the question of the Mangan report, which we will be discussing next week. And there seems in the Fianna Fáil psyche, I think, at this stage, to forget the National Recovery Plan, which was their answer for bringing the country back to economic prosperity. And they propose structural reform in areas of planning of family income supports, including child benefit. And as part of this, Fianna Fáil proposed the development of a rebalanced and integrated child income support payment system, which would provide a universal component to replace the child benefit with one single payment rate per child. The plan proposed that the universal payment would be supplemented with a further payment in the case of children of families in receipt of social welfare payment or in low-income employment. These supplements would replace the qualified child payments and family income supplement as appropriate. And this is precisely the 2-tier model in the Mangan report, which Deputy OD sought to rubbish yesterday. Exactly the same. And it seems to be like the property tax and water charges that Fianna Fáil in opposition are against proposals where they were in favour of them in government. The comfort rejected by the electorate. The comfort of the opposition. Seats, for God's sake. The comfort of the opposition. We lost 58 seats in all air. The leader without interruption. The comfort of the opposition benches means never having to make hard choices, as you know now.
Leader, 640 million was
I'm sure you realise that. Senator Patrick, Senator Patrick has stated that Minister Burton will be in next week and that Minister Fitzgerald will be in the following week. And we will have a debate on the Magdalene Laundries next week. Senator Barrett, in relation to delays in introducing legislation, and Senator Burke's bill in particular. And